When one of NASCAR's greatest legends died, his garage was sealed shut by direct order of the estate, and nobody touched what was inside for years. No auction was scheduled, no donation was arranged, just a padlock on the door and a specific set of instructions that kept everyone out. People who had spent time in that garage before his death, friends, crew members, figures from inside the motorsport world, carried the same unanswered question for years. When the garage finally opened, the small group present came out saying almost nothing publicly, just a few carefully chosen words that explained very little about the silence on their faces, and that silence held for a long time, until now. Understanding why a garage could carry this kind of weight means understanding the man who built everything inside it. Dale Earnhardt Senior didn't simply compete in NASCAR. He became the physical embodiment of stock car racing across 3 decades, earning 7 Winston Cup championships and tying Richard Petty for the most in history, with 76 career wins attached to that record. His driving style ran so aggressive and so controlled at the same time that the men who raced beside him handed him a name that had nothing to do with marketing. They called him the Intimidator because watching his black Chevrolet fill your rearview mirror actually felt like something. The word wasn't borrowed, it was earned. He came out of North Carolina the hard way, watching his father Ralph Earnhardt race on dirt tracks and wanting that life before he fully understood what it cost. School ended for him in the 9th grade, and racing absorbed everything else. Early years brought failure as often as opportunity, but none of it drove him out of the sport. His first Winston Cup championship arrived in 1980, and what followed was a career that didn't just accumulate wins but reshaped what the racing driver's role could look like from the inside out. And that's when the business side came into focus. Earnhardt built Dale Earnhardt Incorporated into one of the most respected organizations in the sport, mentored younger competitors, and understood the economics of NASCAR at a level that surprised people who thought of him only as a man who turned left at 200 miles an hour. The number 3 on that black car meant something beyond sponsorship, and when it appeared on a track, the grandstands registered it before the commentators did. On February 18, 2001, the final lap of the Daytona 500 ended with a crash at Turn 4, and Dale Earnhardt Sr. was gone at 49 years old. The sport fractured in ways that took years to begin describing. People in NASCAR still reference a before and an after, and that's not a figure of speech. It's the most accurate language anyone has found for what changed the day the motorsport world lost him. His garage at the Mooresville, North Carolina property was never a simple storage space, and the people who had been inside described something sitting between a private museum and a working mechanic's shop. Earnhardt's relationship with automobiles extended well past the ones he drove professionally. He collected vehicles that reflected his actual preferences rather than their resale value, modified things to suit himself, and left them exactly as he wanted rather than how they might look in a catalog. Cars sat in that garage the public had never seen, vehicles that never appeared on any formal inventory list, because Earnhardt wasn't the kind of automobile collector who documented his possessions for future estate purposes. When he died, Teresa Earnhardt took on the role of executor and made a series of careful decisions about his property. Some items went to auction, some went to his children, and the garage received its own separate instruction set. Sealed, contents undisclosed, timeline unspecified. No rush attached to it. The people close to the family understood that decision without needing an explanation, because Dale Earnhardt's garage wasn't a building full of inventory. It was the most honest portrait of the man that existed anywhere, built from tools and machines and choices made with no audience in mind. The group present when the garage finally opened was kept deliberately small, with family members, trusted estate representatives, and a handful of individuals connected to the preservation of NASCAR history making up everyone in the room. No press arrived. No cameras came in at first, just people stepping into a space that had held no living person since Earnhardt was alive. What they described afterward came through in fragments because none of them offered much publicly, but the fragments pointed in the same direction. One person present used the word overwhelming. Another described it as walking into a conversation that had been stopped mid-sentence, which is a strange way to describe a room full of automobiles, but none of the people there seemed to disagree with it. Tools sat where he had left them. Personal items, equipment, clothing, things from his daily life around machines remained exactly in place. Nothing had shifted. What produced the quiet that settled over the group wasn't the monetary value of what surrounded them. It was the specificity of everything, the way a room can tell you precisely who a person was when they weren't performing for anyone, and this room did that with unusual clarity. One item inside that garage never appeared on any inventory list anywhere, and the family had no knowledge it was there. That item is coming up, and what it reveals about Dale Earnhardt Senior, the version of him that existed away from championships, away from the racing driver's public life, away from everything the sport knew about him, is the part of this story that changes how you understand the rest of it. Subscribe now, because NASCAR legends built their legacies on the track, and we find what they left behind off it. Among the vehicles and tools and personal effects, one thing stood apart from everything else in that garage: a 1956 Ford F-100 pickup truck, partially disassembled, sitting in the middle of a restoration that had never been finished. No racing connection ran through it, nothing tied to his championships or to Dale Earnhardt Incorporated or to the machinery of his professional life. Just an old Ford pickup truck that Earnhardt had been rebuilding by hand, privately, in the hours he carved out away from all of it. The restoration showed no signs of outside help, and nothing about it suggested he had told many people it was happening. On the workbench beside the truck, handwritten notes laid out what the finished automobile should look like: interior color, specific details, the kind of notes a person writes for themselves rather than for a work order. No destination for the truck appeared anywhere in those notes, but people familiar with the family believe the restoration may have been intended as a gift for someone. And this is where the story shifts from being about a garage to being about a person. Dale Earnhardt Senior spent his professional life as one of the most analyzed athletes in American sports history, every decision on the track studied and debated in the motorsport press. None of that pressure followed him into this building. What the handwritten notes reveal is a man who, in his private hours, pulled apart a 1956 Ford pickup truck and wrote careful descriptions of paint colors with no audience and no stakes, doing the thing he loved most in its most stripped-down form, working with his hands alone towards something that mattered only to him and possibly to whoever was meant to receive it when it was done. The estate's handling of the garage contents has moved with the same deliberateness that sealed the place to begin with, and not everything will go to auction. The family has been consistent on that point. Certain pieces, the F-100 truck among them, are being evaluated for preservation rather than sale, and conversations between the estate and the NASCAR Hall of Fame, where Earnhardt earned his place in the inaugural 2010 induction class, have covered several of the more historically significant items. The NASCAR Historical Society has also been working through the contents for archival documentation, not for immediate museum display, but for the kind of record that becomes part of the sport's official history over time. Vehicles with a direct connection to his racing career will likely move through the auction process, where Earnhardt's name consistently drives prices past initial estimates. His legacy in that market outperforms most athletes across any sport. None of that applies to the unfinished truck, which occupies a different category entirely, and which the family has declined to comment on publicly. People with knowledge of the situation suggest it won't be sold, that it belongs somewhere reflecting the private version of the racing driver rather than the public one, and that wherever it ends up, the handwritten notes travel with it. The garage stayed sealed because some things carry more weight than their market value, and processing them on a timeline set by grief matters more than any auction calendar. What was inside turned out to be both exactly what people expected and nothing like it. A collection that functioned as a biography, written in tools and machines, and an unfinished Ford pickup truck, and notes in a dead man's handwriting, explaining who he was when the championships and the cameras and the black number 3 car weren't part of the picture. NASCAR legends built their legacies on the track. We find what they left behind off it. Subscribe so you never miss another discovery like this one.